This is a really hard video for me to make. It's going to be different than any other video I've put up here on the channel before, and I hope that you'll hang in there with me all the way to the end, because I've got something truly important that I want to share with you then. I grew up in a very strict religious home where I wasn't allowed to watch very many movies or television or listen to much music outside of our religion. And the one thing that I had kind of free reign and access to was books. My parents didn't read a ton, and I think they kind of thought like, oh, if he's reading, that's a good thing, which it was a good thing for me. And so I started reading a ton, and they would kind of let me get as many books as I wanted, and I would blow through them. And I remember reading Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. It came out when I was 9 years old. And I absolutely loved the book. And I remember staying up late, hiding under my blankets with a flashlight, reading it, and then having nightmares that dinosaurs were chasing me. But I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want my parents to take my books. And so I've just always loved reading, and it's been a huge part of my life. And for as long as I can remember, there's been this seed inside of me that I wanted to be a writer. So I tried off and on through my 20s and early 30s. I would, sit down and write out an entire manuscript of an idea I had for a story. I even won NaNoWriMo 3 times, writing an entire novel in the month of November. And yet, none of it was very good. I would share it to some people, and the feedback wasn't great. I even hired an editor one time, and she was like, we might be able to turn this into something, but I really just think she wanted my money. And then 9 years ago, I read the book, The Story Grid by Shawn Coyne, and it really opened up my eyes to what it meant to understand story. Now, Shawn Coyne is the creator and founder of Story Grid, and everything that we teach here on the channel is based on his 30-plus years experience as an editor and writer and story researcher. And if you don't know who I am, I'm the CEO of Story Grid, and I'm a writer as well, and that's kind of what I'm telling you about here. So I ended up reaching out to Shawn after reading the book, and we started the podcast that became the Story Grid podcast, and that was coming up on 9 years ago. Now, I had been in publishing for a long time at this point. I had been a book marketing consultant. I'd worked on a lot of different marketing and launch campaigns for books, for fiction and nonfiction. And at one point, Shawn even called this my shadow career, where I was getting closer and closer to what I actually wanted, which was to be a writer, and yet I was just staying on the peripheral. I had published a couple books before I met Shawn, both of them on book marketing. But in 2020, at the beginning of 2020, we published my first novel, The Threshing. Now, it's a perfectly fine novel. I'm proud of it. But I knew that it wasn't really what I was setting out to do. I had something bigger I was trying to do, something bigger I was trying to say. And yet, I was feeling comfortable in this lane. So I wrote a couple drafts of the next book in the series of The Threshing. I was going to write the sequel to The Threshing. So I wrote an entire first draft of that novel. Shawn read it, threw it out, gave me some feedback, said to try again. I wrote another entire draft of a novel, and after he read it was when he sat me down and said I had a lot more work to do, because he didn't want me to just try to do what I had done before. He wanted to push me as a writer. He wanted me to actually learn how to do really strong line-by-line and scene writing. And he wanted me to push myself to do something that was deeper, something that I would be really proud of, that was getting closer to that idea of leaving the kind of legacy behind that he knew I wanted to leave. So something else happened in 2020 you might be aware of, this pandemic that rocked our world. And the pandemic hurt a lot of people in some really real, external, actually messing up their life way. And I was doing okay externally, but internally is where I was unraveling. And so I ended up doing this type of therapy in 2020 called EMDR therapy. And I'm not really going to get into that, but it's really intense. And for me, it became the most intense thing I'd ever dealt with in my life. And at one point, my wife, I kind of lost myself in the therapy and kind of went a little nuts for a minute, to the point that my wife had to take our kids and go stay with my parents. And for an entire week, I worked with my therapist to try to put me back together. And what was amazing is at the end of that week, I felt like a completely new person in a lot of different ways. and I actually mark my life as pre and post EMDR. But what else happened is while I was in those sessions, when I got all the way down to the bottom, what I found there was stories. And so a couple years later, in the summer of 2022, I was kind of recounting some of these again to my wife, and she suggested, like, hey, you should write these down before you forget them, just so you have them, so that, if you ever want to share them with our kids or something, you can do that. And so I wrote the first one down, wrote the second one down, and I sent them to Shawn to just have a look at them. He said, whatever you're doing, it's working. This is some of the best writing I've seen out of you. I'm like, oh, okay. And so I wrote a couple more, and I was just really using them as a way to write it down, almost like a journal. But also, I'd been practicing my scene writing, so I was trying to make them really good. But there was no plan to publish them or in any way turn them into anything. And then a few months later, my kids were back in school, and I was dropping off my youngest at his school. And on the way there, we were listening to this band called the 21 Pilots. And there's this song they have called The Run and Go. And every time it comes on, it makes me cry. And so just as my son was getting out of the car, it switched to the next track, and it switched randomly to the song The Run and Go. And for some reason, I reached over and hit that repeat button. And so it just started playing over and over. And for the next 25 minutes, as I drove into my office, I was crying, and I felt like a book was downloading into my head. And so when I got to the office, I called Shawn. I was kind of a blubbery mess, and I was trying to explain to him what was going on. And remember, at this point, like, he had been working with me on the scene writing and line-by-line writing, so I actually wasn't supposed to be writing anything longer than a scene, and this had gone on for 2 years. And so what he told me was to get a draft down as fast as possible. So I started writing the draft, got that done, and then actually went back and went through the narrative path, which is what we use here at StoryGrid, what Shawn developed to help people plan out their novels. And so I went through our narrative path, and then I wrote the second draft of the book, and this was a really good draft. It was a working draft. I knew it was good. I did another polished draft after that, and then I turned it into Shawn. Now, this was nerve-wracking for me for a couple reasons. So first of all, if you listen to the podcast at all that we did starting in 2015, you know that Shawn mostly just rips my writing apart. So I would turn in scenes, and he would just tell me everything that was wrong with the scenes and basically go back and try again. As I already mentioned, he took 2 entire manuscripts and just tossed them out and told me to try again. So my track record of getting things approved by Shawn was pretty low. And I had now worked on this thing for over a year, done 2 full drafts and, the polished draft. And so I sent it to him. We're actually together in Las Vegas for an event. And so I sent it to him right before I left town so that he would have time to read it on the plane ride back. And he ended up calling me from the airport on a Sunday, which is very strange for him. I actually thought something was wrong because he was calling me on a Sunday when I knew he was traveling. And I answered the phone, and he told me that not only was the book I'd sent him the best thing I'd ever written, he thought it was one of the best things he's ever read. And right there, I think I could have died a happy man. I mean, it was like I felt like I'd finally done it. I'd finally taken something that was truly deep inside of me, something that I feel like is really important to say, and I put it into a book, and I sent it to the one person I knew that would know if it was good and tell me the truth if it was good or not. And so after that, we came up with the title that we were going to use for the book. He had me make a couple more changes to the book, and then he did his line-by-line edit of the book to kind of pump it up and add some stuff in it he thought it needed. Then we sent it off to the copy editor. We sent off the title and our idea to the cover designer, and what we got back is the advanced reader copy of my book, The Shithead. I'm going to tell you how to get your own copy of this in just a minute. It's going to be a free copy, and I want to give it to you. So just hang in there one second. I'm going to tell you about that. So people keep asking me what my book is about, and I've really struggled to describe this. In fact, a few months ago, I was talking to a friend of mine in the publishing industry, and he asked me what my book was about, and I kind of hesitated. I was like, man, you're going to roll your eyes when I say it, because if somebody told me this, I would roll my eyes if they told me this. But I told them there's really nothing like it out there on the market. I've read a ton. I've read a ton. As far as I know, there's nothing on the market like this. So I actually took this back to Shawn and I said, Shawn, I'm having trouble figuring out like what genre do I tell people this thing is in? Like, where would this go? What books would this sit next to? I can't think of any. And he said, Tim, the problem with your book is it's a category of one book, which means there are no other books like it. And he's way more well-read than me. So it was good to hear that. So I said, Shawn, what do I tell people if they ask me about the book? He said, just tell them if they read this book, they will have a more meaningful life. And that's a big promise. That's a really big promise, but I actually stand by that. I think that's true. I think that's true for a couple reasons. One is what I put in this book is really important, and I think that it will change your life for the better if you read it. I think it's well worth your time. The other thing is I've gotten feedback from about 50 people that have read this version of it, and they heavily agree with that too. In fact, one of the guys that's going to blurb it, he's a New York Times bestselling author, and we were talking about, he's like, well, how do you want me to do this blurb? And he's like, I can't think of any other book I've read that's like this. I was like, I know, me neither. And so, but this is a book that has stuck with him, that he loves, and I've gotten that feedback from a lot of different people. So there you have it. My new book, The Shithead, comes out September 19th, 2024. And if you read it, you'll have a more meaningful life. And in fact, you can start reading it right now. I want to give you a copy right now. So you can get your own copy, free copy of the Advanced Reader Edition of The Shithead if you go to storygrid.com/shithead. Put in your name and email address, and you can download the ebook and start reading it immediately. If you want a paper copy of the ARC, I'll send you one of those. Just go ahead and sign up, put your name and email in, and in the email you get, there'll be a link where you can buy an ARC copy. All you have to do is pay the shipping, and I'll cover the cost of the book. There's one catch though. So before you download your copy, you need to know about the catch. So if you download an ebook copy of The Shithead, the ARC version, or if you get the paperback, if you pay for shipping, I'm going to ask you to leave a review. So you are agreeing by downloading the ebook copy or getting the paperback of the ARC, you're agreeing to first read the entire book to the end by September 19th. It's about 80,000 words, so it's not super long, but it's a novel. And you've got to read it by September 19th. And then on September 19th, you've got to go to Amazon.com or Goodreads and leave an honest review of what you think about the book. So I guess it's not free. I mean, you don't have to pay money, but you are going to pay your time. So go to storygrid.com/shithead, and the information about it's there. There's a little video from Shawn if you want to hear what Shawn thinks about the book as well. But you can download the ebook, you can get the paperback of the ARC, and all I'm asking in return is that you actually read it and you leave a review on Amazon or Goodreads on September 19th. Don't worry, if you sign up, I'll send you emails to remind you when it's coming up. So I'm going to say one more thing at the end here, and this is probably the hardest part of this entire thing for me. So putting out a book is hard. If you've published a book, putting your creativity out in the world is really tough. And then on top of that, this book was really, really hard to write. It was very personal for me. I had to go down into the basement of my psyche and find this book. And so sharing that part of myself with the world is pretty hard too. But there's a third thing for this book that makes it really hard. And Shawn brought this up after he read it, and he said, "This, Tim, is the proof of concept of what we can do at StoryGrid." And it's true. If you go back and read my writing back in 2015 when we started the podcast, it was really, really bad. Every once in a while, I'll go back and read some of my early stuff, and I'm like, holy shit. And that was when I thought I was okay at writing, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not very good. And then what I've done in The Shithead, I'm really, really proud of. It's a really well-written book. It's a great story. And like I said, it's going to make your life more meaningful. And so that's the third kind of layer here, is that we believe that this book is a proof of concept of what StoryGrid can do. because there's this belief out in the writing world that you can't really teach people how to write. And I just think that's bullshit. And I know it's bullshit because Shawn taught me how to write. And so that's another thing about this book that I think if you're at all interested in what we do here at StoryGrid, I think you should read it just because you'll know whether or not we're full of shit or not. So that's the third level of pressure of putting this book out as well. But I'm mostly just excited to share it with you. I've been working on this. Part of me feels like I've been working on this my entire life. And so it's the most important thing I've ever done creatively. And the fact that I'm actually getting to share it with you just means so much to me. So again, the link's down in the description if you want to just click the link, but you can go to storygrid.com/shithead to get your copy. And I can't wait to see what you think about it. So thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. And I'll see you in the next video, which should be back to regularly scheduled, writing tips. See you there.